Welcome to day 9 of this challenge. Yesterday you have learned a lot of HTTP status codes, and today you will learn how you can create Angular forms and send them to the RESTful API, our ASP.NET Core application, to create some new elements on the server. Both HTTP GET and HTTP POST methods are based on the request response model. However, to receive data from a server, we use the GET method, and to create something new on the server, we use the POST method. GET request bodies may include search parameters that you send to the server to receive some data, whereas POST request bodies can include data you want to send to the server to create something new on the server. You should never use GET method to modify something on the origin server. Likewise, never use the POST method to query data from a web server. The response body of a GET request usually includes the requested data, and the response status code is 200. In comparison, POST request that successfully creates something on the server should return the 201 created status code and the location header, which includes a link to the created resource. So if successful, HTTP GET returns 200 and the requested information, and a successful HTTP POST returns a 201 created status code and a link or URL to the new created element on the server. Now let's switch to our project and see all of this really in action. Welcome to this video. Before we implement the book functionality, we should create any kind of passenger login page, right? So that you can first of all sort of log in or give your information about who you are so that we know who is booking a flight. For this, we will create a completely new component called Register Passenger. So first of all, let's do that. On the right side in your project, click on Client App Folder and open in Terminal. Now you have done that a lot of times before already now. Let's go ahead and create a brand new component in Angular. For that we use the command npx ng Angular gc generate component. Let's call it register minus passenger, and the flag module is app. So we attach it directly to the app module. So it's exactly the comment that we have used 2 times before now, but this time we call the component register passenger. Now let's go ahead, press enter and let Angular create the component. Afterwards, you can see that we have 4 new files and for sure the updated app module so that our new component is directly integrated in the app module. Let's add it to our routing right now. Open the client app folder, open up source, and then search for the app module.ts. You can see that we have the register passenger component here. This is the one that we have just created, and it's already inside of the declarations here. This is what happens when we use that module flag when we create the component. And now we add a brand new path right here so that we have a path for registration or sort of registration, right? So let's call it register minus passenger. And as you can already tell, we for sure use a component, and the component is register passenger component. There we go. Now let's save it like this and let's start our application and visit the /register passenger URL. Now here in our application, switch to register minus passenger. There we go. Now you can see register passenger works. So our component is loading. We have that route set up. And now we can start working on some templates, so HTML right here. But no worries, it's not that much. It's just a simple, well, let's call it login form, where you can provide your email address and your name, and then we have a simple login button, right? So it's pretty default. Welcome to this video. Now we will add some HTML markup. In your project, open Client App Folder, Source, and then inside of App, visit our new component folder, Register Passenger, open it up and go to the Register Passenger component HTML. So the markup, right? Open that and you can see Register Passenger works. Now, please go ahead to our GitHub repository and check day 9 and search for Register Passenger component HTML, right? And then simply go ahead, take the content of the file and paste it inside here. Now you can see, let me zoom out a little bit real quick. I know you will not be able to read it anymore, but this is everything we have right here. And as you can see, it's still some bootstrap, So just default stuff, and then we got some input fields right here, and they have a placeholder. And a placeholder has nothing to do with any sort of data binding or stuff like that. It's really just simply saying, okay, inside of that input field, there is like a placeholder text which is saying email. And then we have that label, and that for attribute here is just saying that this label is meant to, well, be visible or is meant for this input field. So here there is no data binding. It's really completely plain HTML. But once we get to that input fields right here, you can see class form check input, which means that this is a checkbox. You can see that here is female, is male. Just need to get rid of that small typo here, but that's not a problem. It wouldn't change anything at all. So you can see that value here, and it's set to true, and here it's set to false. So default value is female. You could also set that to male, whatever you like, and the type is a radio button. You will see that in action just in a second. Now, here below, you can see we have a button of type submit. A button of type submit submits the form where the button is inside. And then you can see we have login text, and we have an icon for login in. You can see font awesome sign in button or icon, and we're done. Now, as I said, a button of type submit submits a form, but right now we don't have a form tag here. So this is just our point to really get started. And now when you visit that page /register passenger, you can see that form here, email, first name, last name, female, male, and all of this. Right now, if you tick the boxes, you can see that it's, well, a little bit buggy, but that's not a problem because we haven't really used Angular now, which will take care about the validation of all of this and make the form really working. But that's just HTML template from where we start now. Welcome to this video. We should now go ahead and create a new controller for our passengers. So if a passenger registers, well, sort of registers for booking a flight, we should track that information about which passengers exist in our application right now. So in this 21-day challenge, we will for sure not use a real database. Instead, we will use only in-memory saving. However, if you are interested in authorization and authentication and in using a real SQL database, you should follow up with one of the additional challenges to extend this application even further. So in your project, right-click on your controllers folder, create or add a new controller, and on the left side select API, and then take the API controller empty. Let's click add. As name we pass in passenger controller, and then we hit enter. Now, one thing to mention here directly, you can see the route is by default set to API/controller. But if we take a look at our flight controller, you can see that our route here is just starting with controller. So it would be flight. Now, inside of the passenger controller that we have just created, remove the API/. We don't want our API endpoints starting at API/, right? We want to start it directly at /passenger, for example, not /API/passenger. Okay, so route and then controller, and for sure we used it API controller, and as you can see, also this controller here is inherited by the controller base. Now we need to create an endpoint for registration. Right now we don't really have to write the logical code. We only want to have that endpoint to really try to connect the Angular form to that endpoint so that everything is working fine, and afterwards we can track the registered users inside of a static list, for example. So create a public iActionResult, right? Remember, iActionResults are capable of returning status codes. Then we have a name, we call it register, and we simply, since we are not writing any code right now which handles the registration, we go ahead and throw a new not implemented exception, right? We are professional programmers, so that's what we're doing. Now think about the last day. What have you learned? First of all, this is an HTTP post endpoint. Why? Pretty simple. This is registration, and registration creates something new, okay? If you create an account, you use HTTP post because you create something new on the server. So instead of HTTP GET, you now use that HTTP post attribute right here. And as I said, just remember a day back, we should now attach some attributes for produce response type. So let's think about what responses we should return from here. So what response types are getting produced? We got that 201. Just remember to the presentation earlier, 201 stands for created new or new created, right? So if we register, we don't return 200 because a successful HTTP post should return a 201 for new created. So this is best practice, keep that in mind. Produces response type, for sure, we have any sort of 400 from client side, right? Anything here gone wrong from the client side, and for sure 500 when it comes to failure of database connection or whatever, something that fails on server side. Now, this is all we have to do. We should now be able to take a look at that register endpoint. Let's save it here. Now think about when we register a new passenger, we will need to have some information here, right? So what's the email address or what's the name, for example. So every time when you create something new, you most likely want to receive some information, right? So if you want to create a blog post, for example, you want to have a title and a description. If you want to register a user, you want to have a name and an email address, maybe birth date and all of that. If you want to create a hotel booking, you want to have a room number and a guest name and maybe arrival and departure time, for example. If you want to create something, you mostly want to have specific information. I don't want to go ahead here and say, okay, we have string username, we have string email address, we have a string pre-name and string last name. Right? So instead of that, we will now create a so-called data transfer object, or in short, DTO. Actually, it's just a simple C# class, or we use a record right here, but it could also be a simple class. Once we have that created, we can use that class or record here as a parameter, and then we can go ahead and take the information from one object instead of from multiple parameters, right? So in your project, create a new folder. So click on flights here or whatever you have named your project. Click on add and add a new folder. And let's call it DTOs. So data transfer objects. That's what it means. Right click on it and let's add a new C# class. And we call that new passenger DTO. There we go. Now for sure this will be a class by default. But we make this a record. We already did that before, so we can remove the braces here, the curly braces, and instead add some parameter brackets. And then inside here we say string email, for example, string first name, string last name, there you go, last name, and bool for gender. As you can imagine, if you have any other type of application, you can for sure create a DTO which contains your specific information, right? So for now, this is how a passenger in our case looks like. Great. Now switch back to the flight controller. Now switch back to our passenger controller. And here say using flights.dtos. Now we can scroll down, and inside of the register action, we can go ahead and use our new passenger DTO. Let's call it DTO, for example, right? So this is also just preparation. We don't have to do anything with it right now, but that's the structure of what information we want to have. So if you call the register endpoint here, you want to provide the information about the new passenger. So email, first name, last name, and gender. And we can provide that information as JSON, and then C# here or ASP.NET Core will automatically map it to that new passenger data transfer object. Now let's save it here and then take a look at our Swagger UI. So here we are now at that Swagger UI again. And if you cannot see passenger here, you need to go ahead and start your application again so that it really compiles from scratch. Now let's take a look. We open that up. And you can see an example value would look like email, first name, last name, and gender, right? So this is exactly the type of our DTO or the fields. Now you can also see the documentation. Responses could be 201 created, 400 bad request, and 500 server error. Now let's try that. Try it out and let's hit execute. I mean, we can enter here some real values, but that's fine. Let's simply press execute. And you can see the response status code here is 500, which is fine, which is a server error. Take a look here. The method or operation is not implemented, right? System not implemented exception. And that totally makes sense because here in our code, we have the throw new not implemented exception. So this here is coming from the server, right? Because ASP is running on the server, and you can guess that it then for sure returns the 500, and that's exactly what we're seeing. We're seeing a 500 error response, which is saying not implemented because it's a server-side, well, problem. Now we don't have that implemented yet, so it's not a real problem because we haven't even written the logical code behind it. Great, now it's time to switch back to Angular again and make sure to update the client-side code. Welcome to this video. Make sure that your application is running in the background because we now go ahead into our client app. So right click on the client app folder and then open in terminal. And now we will again update our client-side code because we have for sure adjusted our RESTful API, or we created a new endpoint and a new controller, right? So we have to update our Angular client-side code. So simply run npx ng -openapi -gen. You can see that we now have generation finished with 4 modules and 2 services. You can also see here wrote new passenger DTO and passenger service, right? So everything seems to be fine. Okay, now it's time to switch back into our HTML form, register passenger. There we go, just a second, here we have it, register passenger, right? This is where we just created that form where we have that login button, and this login button that we have here, that one will call a register function or register method, which we don't have right now, but which we will create exactly in that moment. So open up client app folder, go up to source, go to app, go to register passenger and go to register passenger component.typescript. So for sure we go now to that TypeScript file, to the component itself. You can see the template URL is exactly this one. So make sure that you're inside of the right component, register passenger component. And now we for sure need to get our new service that we have created from the client API, which is the passenger service, right? You can still see that below here. That one got created, passenger service. So we take that here and then we create a new method, which is register, and that register method will get called from the form button. So in the end, what will happen is you get the form, you click on login, that one will then call the register function inside of the service finally, which will then talk to the REST API, so ASP. Great, now, first of all, we import the new service here. Import passenger service from, there we go, API/services/passenger.service. Now we have that service inside of our registration component here. And if we want to use it, we have to take it inside of the constructor. So private passenger service. You can see a pattern, right? We always are doing the same stuff if we want to use a service, etc. So we always have to update the client app, then check if we have created a new service, and if we want to use that service, import it, take it inside of the constructor for dependency injection, and then we can make use of it. Now let's create a new method, which is register, and that method is simply going ahead and taking this passenger service and calling register passenger. You can see the parameter new passenger DTO, right? So everything seems to be configured correctly. Now go to the HTML again, and here in the button where we have that submit, we simply register a click event. So go ahead and do that. Click equals to register, and then we don't pass in any other information. So this here is for sure this method. Now, we need for sure some more information, because when we simply go ahead and call register, then we don't have any information yet passed from what we have inside that form, because here we have the email, first name, last name, but we are not using it in any way. So once we click the register button or login button, the method will get called, but we for sure need some more information. So one neat way to do that is now to really make use of these input fields that we have here. And if we want to use it, we have to use the form tag. So now let's add the form tag. And if you have copied it from the GitHub page, you might already have it. So go ahead and pay attention here. If you already have the form tag, you for sure don't have to add it again. Now I just collapse that, copy it, and paste everything inside that form tag. Let's save it here. Now by using a form tag like this, we can go ahead and access the input fields or the values. So this is just the beginning, but we leave it like this for now. If we now want to use the information of the form, we have to use a reactive forms module. So now go to your app.module.ts right here. You can see the forms module, right? And we now make use of the reactive forms module. So add it here in the import statement. Then scroll down. Here in the imports, you can see forms module. Add the reactive forms module. So this is sort of preparing everything for dependency injection. So now we can use reactive forms inside of our Angular project. So now switch back to our TypeScript component, register passenger TypeScript, right? Exactly there where we have that register method. And now again, import form builder from Angular core. Can copy it from here, from Angular core. There we go. So this is form builder. Add Angular/forms. So we now have access to the form builder. Take it inside of the constructor again, just as always. So simply private FB, for example, form builder. Let me just line that in. Great. So we have passenger service and form builder. And now we can for sure use that form builder to access the values of the form. And inside there we can find email address, first name, last name, and gender, right? So now the important part takes place. We for sure need any kind of data binding again. So we use that form builder to create a completely match of the information we want to have here, or we have here, depending on email, for example, first name, last name, etc. So we now use that form builder to create a form. Keep in mind, I will now do that. I will add it here at the very top. We call this form. Okay, so later on we can use that name here, that property, to connect it in HTML. This is very important. So this dot form builder dot group. So we create a new form group. However, what that means is we simply create a form just like a form, email, and the default value is null or just empty, right? Sort of like this. First name, same, since this is also a string, we do it exactly the same way. Also for last name, there we go, last name, and for is female. This is how it's named inside of the form, and here the value, default value, is true. You can for sure switch it if you like. This is the match of how our form looks inside of the HTML, right? You can see that here, email, first name, last name, etc. Just based on the information. For sure, we haven't bound it yet. We didn't use form, email, or first name, right? You can see if we take a look at email here, there is nothing which is telling, okay, it's email, right? We only have a placeholder and some text here, and this is also just a label. So we need to define or bind this so that this input field knows, okay, I meant for email, right? Because the placeholder isn't changing anything. We can, for example, entirely remove it. So the input field doesn't know, okay, I'm an email input field, and the placeholder doesn't change that. So we need to add some binding here. Let's switch back to the TypeScript component. As I said, this property is called form, and now we will use it. Switch back to HTML, and as I said, keep in mind this name is form, and inside of the form tag here, go ahead and add form group, right? And set the value to form. And this line of code or statement here, form group equals to form, will set it to this group, and the name of it is form, right? So we assign a form group with the name form, this property. So you can see it's type of form group, right? You can see that right here. So now this form is actually attached to this group here. Now that's not enough. We also have to combine all the single fields here. That's not a lot of work once we have done it. For this, we go inside of the input field here, form control name equals to email, and now we bind it. Form control name, this is a very important attribute. Form control name email will bind it to this, to our form control group we are inside because we've connected it, and then email. And now this input field is bound to that information here, email. So we copy that form control name, and for sure we now scroll down. In the first name we set it to first name. Definitely make sure that you don't add any typos here. So first name should be exactly written like here. Now we'd have to do that for last name too. Last name, and here also for is female. And in the second one below, we also have that is female. So now we have everything completely bound. So let's switch back to our TypeScript component, and register will get called once we have actually pressed the button. So let's log console.log the information of our form. So form values, for example, is equals to this dot form.value. So since we have bound it, so once we fill out the HTML form, we will have that information right here inside that form property. And once we click register, we will log the information about this property. So all of the input here. Now let's save it and start our application. I started the application and visited register passenger. Now, first of all, if we have female and male here, you can see we are now able to switch, right? Because it's bound. So let me enter some fake values. Let me open the console, Ctrl+Shift+J if you are on Chrome browser. Now let me clear the console because that error here is just coming from our favicon missing. And now let's click on login. You can see the entry here, form values. You can see email, first name is female and last name. So all of the information. What does that mean? We are able to log it here. So we have the information inside of our register. So we can now go ahead and call that service here to actually really call the backend part, and we can provide the information from the form. So we can now use the form and build the DTO, right, the new passenger DTO, and send it right into the service and send it right to our backend endpoint. So we should make a break here, and in the next video we will continue here sending the information, and then you have achieved something really important. You have completely set up a new endpoint, set up a form, bound the complete form, and then send it back to the API controller. And that's something you really have to use a lot of times when you work as a web developer, for sure. In the last video I said that we will now actually send this register form by using the passenger service, right? We are actually making that call already here, register passenger, and in that card that pops up you can see that we can pass in a body. Now we should do that. Simply pass in a new object and set the body to be this.form.value, exactly like we have it in the console log, right? Feel free to remove it if you like, but for now I'll keep with it for debugging, so this is fine and helps a little. This register passenger for sure is again an observable, so we can go ahead and subscribe to it, and once we did that, we can create sort of a delegate using it to simply, well, actually run some code. Console log, for example, form posted to server. So once we have received the post back, we will run console log form posted to server. Now let's switch back to our application. Now after restarting the application and filling out the form, let's click on login again. You can see the form values are correct, but we are not able to post. And you can see that error here, right? You get that from origin has been blocked by course policy. To fix that issue, we go ahead and modify our course policy that we have registered in our ASP.NET program and do it so that we allow any methods, so also HTTP post and any headers which are set in the request itself. So switch back to our project and now open up program.cs, scroll a little bit down until you can find our use course right here. And now we can extend that even further. So after build with origins, we go ahead and say .allow any method and .allow any headers or any header. There we go. So if you do it like this, this is nicely lined up now, so you should be able to see it in a good way. We allow in any domain and we allow for any method, so HTTP GET, POST, DELETE, etc. and any headers which are set inside of the request. Now let's save it like this and take a look at the application again. Restart the application to make the changes completely loaded. Now, after visiting the page and filling out the form, let's click on login again now. Yeah, and you can see that it's working. We don't have that course error anymore, but instead we got that 500 internal server error message. Let's open it up and it's saying error is system not implemented exception. So that's perfect because in our controller, right, in that endpoint, we have that throw not implemented exception. So we know that everything is working now and we can continue on setting up the code inside of that endpoint. And we can continue now setting up the functional code inside of that method. So now let's switch to our backend again and continue working on the actions there. Okay, welcome back. Now here I am inside of our passenger controller, and as I said earlier, right now we don't make use of a real database, but for sure if a passenger registers or actually wants to book a flight, we should keep track of it at least in runtime during the, well, actually lifetime of the application. So even if we register 5 bookings, or if we book 5 flights, we should keep track of them as long as the application is alive. Now we do that as we did it earlier with a static list, because a static list will not get deleted once we receive a new request. By default, if we don't create it in a static way, every time a new request hits the passenger controller, a new instance would get created of that list. So since it's not shared between the controller, right? I mean, this is exactly what static is doing. Now, let's create a static list. Static private I list of type new passenger DTO, because this is how a passenger object should look like, equals to new list. There we go, AI doing our work here. Static private list passengers new list. There we go. Okay, great. So inside the register action here, we will now take the DTO that we are receiving and simply put it right into our passengers list. So take a look right here. You got that line. I will now zoom in again and this new list will disappear, so no worries. And here we have that passengers dot add and then DTO. There we go. Now finally, we for sure don't want to throw the new implemented exception anymore. Instead, we want to return status code OK. And we can go ahead and add some console log information, but what you would do by default is you would use console.writeLine, but in ASP.NET Core you would not be able to see that information. Instead, you want to go ahead and use system.diagnostics.debug.writeLine. And using this method, you would be able to see the actual writeLine or the log inside of the output. You will see that in a second. Now, what we want to know here is we want to know the count of the passengers. So simply go ahead and write down passengers.count so that we have any idea of how many passengers are registered inside of our application or inside of that static list right here. Now, if we want to see that log, we should go ahead and start the application using the debugging mode. So simply go ahead and click on the green arrow at the top bar. Now, once our application is started, let's move to our register passengers endpoint, open the console, get rid of these arrows showing here using the favicon, right? And then simply fill out the form. Now, once that's done, click on login and you will see on the right side, form posted to server. Now, switch back to our application and here on the bottom right side for me, you can see call stack. Let's switch to output. You will see that 1 here, so this is for me, right? Now, let me open the application again. This time I will spam it a little bit so that you can definitely see that number there, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and again, right? So everything is working. We have that call on the register endpoint. You also know how you can log yourself some information. For sure, you can go ahead and set a breakpoint for debugging, right? So we can also do that. Set the breakpoint here. Open up the application, click on login. You can see that breakpoint firing. We can look at the DTO right here. If you hold the cursor above it, you can see, all right, we got Yannick, Leisman, gender, right? Everything, so gender should be like his female or whatever, doesn't really matter. We got that transferred later on and everything is working nice. So just for you to give a hint on how you can debug those informations. However, the passenger is now set and we know that we have received the information. This is very nice. Now we need to implement another action, which is actually finding a passenger, right? So right now we're saving it inside of that passenger list here. And later on, we will need to have an action where we can say, hey, please find a passenger inside of that list. And that's what we now next up will create. And it won't take too long. So see you in the next video. Okay, now here inside of our passenger controller, we want to go ahead and create a find action to find a passenger from that list. So first of all, go ahead to the very top and create a using directive read model. So sorry, flight.read models. There we go. Now we can use our read models folder here, and inside there we got the flight read model and the time place read model, and we will now create a passenger read model because our DTO, and that's now very important, DTO is only for data transferring because it means data transfer object, right? So you would never, or usually you would never write DTO into a database because DTOs are just for transferring data from A to B, but not for saving, because they may contain additional information or they may have a naming which is not correct or not the way you want it. So usually what you do is for submitting data from A to B, you would use a data transfer object, a DTO. And then if you want to save it to a database, you can use a clean model, let's call it read model here, which is exactly looking like you want to save it into the database. So right now, our read model, which we will create, will exactly look like the new passenger DTO, or sort of like. But later on, you maybe not only want to send a new passenger here, maybe you want to send in a new passenger and a new flight and some more information, right? And then you cannot take it and save it into the database because it has much more information. So this is why you have a data transfer object, not only passenger, maybe more information. And then you take that data transfer object and take the information you got from there and put it right into the read model, and then you save those read models. I know it sounds complicated, but it isn't really. Let's move on now. Inside of our read models folder, right click, add a new C# class. We will again make this a record and we will call it passenger RM, passenger read model. Now make this a record. Again, remove the curly braces, we don't need it for a record. Add the default parameter braces. String email, string, oh sorry, there should be a comma, not a dot. There we go. String email, string first name, string last name, and bool gender. As I said, right now, missing semicolon here, right now our passenger RM is exactly looking like the DTO. But later on, once you develop maybe a different application, it will maybe not be in that case because you're submitting more information, for example. So not only a passenger, maybe there is some additional information, and then your DTO is not matching the structure of your database model. Great. Now passenger controller. You will see where we will use that passenger read model in a second. No worries. Now let's create our nice action. Go ahead and create a public action result, and it's returning a passenger read model. Call that find, and we find it by email. So if you find something, you for sure have to, well, use any query. So give me a passenger with the email Yannick@tutorials, for example, right? So this is why we need that email here. Actually, what is more important is that we need to do that inside of the HTTP GET attribute. Right here, we can specify what query or what parameter we are looking at, email. So we will send in the email and we can then use it here inside of the parameter. Let's do exactly this. Let's search for passenger inside of our list. So passengers, there we go, this is our static list, first or default. So please go ahead into that list and find one for me or none. You can see that auto completion going on here, which is totally correct. You can go ahead and press tab and then it automatically folds out that statement or expression. We can change X, for example, to P for passenger, and that would go find that passenger in the passengers list, or find any passenger in that list. Find a single passenger in that list with that email, right? Passenger, where passenger email goes to the email from the parameter. Now, as I already said, if you have absolutely no clue about those expressions, go ahead and check out LINQ. It's pretty default C# knowledge, because it's how you can really quickly find elements inside of lists or collections at all. And you really want to know that. So if you understand what's going on here, totally fine, go ahead and stick with it. But if you're super confused, check out like a 10-minute documentation about LINQ. You can find that on Microsoft page directly. Just go ahead and search for C# LINQ. It's possible that we don't have a passenger, right? So I can write down johndoe@gmail.com, and if we don't have a passenger like this, the passenger here, this object will be null. So we need to make a null check. If passenger equals to null, then we return a not found. And in any other case, we have found a passenger, and we can simply return an OK and pass in the passenger in the response body. Let's take a look, or a real close look. You can see action result is type of passenger RM, but our list here is type of new passenger DTO. So a passenger here will be of passenger DTO. Now we can go ahead, return OK, and return a new passenger DTO here, but what's required is a passenger RM. However, you can see that we don't have a compiler error. Let's go ahead and let's try out and see what happens. Go to the Swagger UI and you can see the get endpoint here, passenger email. So what we do now is we will first create a passenger. So post passenger, let's click on try it out. You can see email, let's write down something here, jl@gmail.com, whatever, it doesn't really matter. You can keep everything as it is. Let's say first name Yannick and then some sort of last name. And then we can simply execute it. We got that 200 response, right? So this is absolutely fine. Now let's close it here. And then click on passenger email and let's search for it. Try to search for it. Click on try out and then jl@gmail.com. That's the mail that I've just used in the passenger call, in the posting just a second before. Let's click on execute. And you can see that it actually worked because we have found the response here, 200 status code, and here we got jl@gmail.com, Yannick, and then Do. So this is the information that I've posted before, and we were able to get this object from our C# list just by using that email here and then querying for it. Now, even though we found the passenger and well actually have that action result here of type passenger RM, and it's not really checking, or .NET is not checking if the type is matching, and we got that new passenger DTO right here, we should go ahead and do that explicitly. So we should definitely make sure that the values are matching and that we are returning a passenger read model and not a new passenger DTO. As I mentioned earlier, both types are matching each other, but that's not how it could look like in a potential other software later on. Now we take care about that explicitly. So we take our passenger RM, or we will create a passenger RM and then return it. So let's create a new one. Var RM read model equals to new passenger RM. And since this is a record, we can provide all of the information inside of the parameter braces right here. So let's do that. Set email here to passenger.email, passenger.firstname, passenger.lastname, and passenger.gender. So now we have created that read model. So since this is a record, we can do that inside of the parameter braces here or brackets and can just pass in the values, right? So hold the cursor above it, you can see it, string, email, first name, last name, and the values are whatever the passenger is. And the passenger is the DTO, and we will create a read model from it. So we will create a read model from the values of the DTO that we have received from our list. Now, instead of returning the passenger, we will now return the read model, and now everything is matching each other. So we got that action result, and it's, well, returning a passenger read model. And now we return OK and send in a passenger read model. So we now have that really matching. So pay attention on that. Okay, so there is another thing to mention here. Once we have created or registered everything, go ahead and try to find real quick right now an error right here. So not an error, but something we can improve. Well, it's pretty simple. We are producing the response type 201, and as I said earlier, if we create something new on the server, we should return a 201 status code. So this one here, okay, is 200, but we should go ahead and instead return 201, which is return created. So it's definitely okay if you go ahead and return an okay result. That's fine, 200, but you should go ahead and return a 201, and you will be forced to add a URI and an optional value. To make our life easier, we can then switch to use created@action. Now we can use name of find, and then we pass in value. Let's create a new object, set email to dto.email. There we go. Just need to switch the colon here to an equal sign. So what's happening now? Return created@action. We will now want to send in some values here. You got that action name and that value, and we redirect to finding because that one is returning us in the end the object, because we're sending here the email. So what we're doing is we do a simple call on that find in the end, right? And that one is returning us an object, so the passenger read model, and we will get this, and we will get that as an URL and have the information about where our new passenger got created. Great, so this is another best practice tip for you. Created@action, and then simply call that method, which returns you the desired object that you have just created, and this will post back your URI, which is pointing to the new object. Now we are done. Let's start our application one more time, save it here. Now inside of our Swagger UI, let's post a new passenger. Simply click on try out, enter some values. I will keep it exactly like this because we're only looking at the return type or the status code. So click on execute. You can see we got 201, which is actually our correct status code. And we got in the response body the email that we can use to get the data. So you can see here in the location, in the header, it's pointing to passenger find. So we can go to passenger find and use that email provided right here, which is just a string, but that's just because I let it down here or let it be default value string, right? So, and then we can use this endpoint find that value here to find the new created object. And this is what created add action is doing. Very nice. Now, as you can see, we used the OK result before and that was pretty easy and it still worked. But you know, there are some sort of RFC standards that I got right here, which are providing really detailed information about how your RESTful API endpoints should look like and what they should return. So, and we want to be professionals, right? And so we should really pay some time on building the RESTful API endpoints really regarding to a very specific pattern to work in the most professional way. Great, so now we have come to the end of day 9. Again, it was a day full of new learnings probably for you, and I'm very excited to see you back again tomorrow.